Good morning, everybody, distinguished guests, speakers, colleagues, everyone joining us from around the world today, wherever you may be. My name is Dr. Michael Hardman. I have the absolute delight of chairing today's plenary, the second day of the International Symposium on Inclusive Cities. I'm from the University of Salford in the United Kingdom, so I'm joining you from England at the moment, a bit earlier in the day here. And I'm looking forward to hopefully a wonderful session today with some amazing speakers, some amazing keynotes, and hopefully some amazing discussion as well. First of all, can I please acknowledge and thank the South African Research Chair Initiative, particularly Professor Hope Chipungu, who is joining us today, and the University of KwaZulu-Natal for sponsoring and supporting not just today, but the entire event and bringing together this multidisciplinary symposium. As of today, as you've probably seen in your programs, we've got an array of speakers who will be joining us, and I will shortly introduce them, including our wonderful keynotes who we've got coming up in a short while. And we'll have time for discussion at the end as well. So as you'll see at the bottom, there's a question and answer box, and we'll come to that a bit later where you're able to have a discussion and pick up on some of the points from some of our presenters and keynotes today as well. Before I hand over to Professor Chipungu to give a short reflection on yesterday, as there was a huge program yesterday of events and a wide array of speakers and really interesting talks as well, I thought I'd just give my own very brief reflection on the importance of what we're discussing today, both in this plenary, but more widely across the International Symposium. As many of you are aware, populations are rising. We've got 9.1 billion people by 2050, of which 70% will be living in cities, putting increased pressure on our urban centres. So this topic of inclusive cities, this concept is more important than ever. And particularly during COVID, that has shown the huge inequalities that exist within our urban areas. And again, the importance of a lot of the topics and points that we're picking up on, not just in this plenary, but the wider international symposium as well. In the United Kingdom, we're already seeing a shift in a lot of policy and practice. Things like participatory planning are becoming more mainstream and more upscaled. Only recently, we had the new planning white paper here that looked to upscale tools such as neighbourhood planning that would not just merely consult people in the planning process, but put them central to that process, involving them in the construction of their neighbourhoods. In Durban in South Africa, for example, there's been some recent discussions about how you can involve informal communities in the planning process. There's some great examples there of colleagues in Durban pioneering practice and pushing forward some of the topics that we're exploring today. The post-COVID city we're seeing in the news now, in the mainstream media, in academic papers, in practice and policy, a huge appetite for concepts such as the 15-minute city, the healthy cities agenda, the smart cities agenda, all of which link together with what we're speaking about today and as part of this wider symposium. And even in my very niche area of research, my background, my area is all about urban agriculture and how we can bring food production into the urban centre. Because of COVID, we're seeing a huge focus on this in the post-COVID city. And urban agriculture can act as a tool for social inclusion, for economic inclusion, can act as a tool for reinventing our cities, creating new jobs, acting as tools for bringing together people, communities, neighborhoods, which are often fragmented. Again, linking really well to the inclusive cities agenda, what we're discussing today. The green recovery on a larger scale, the appetite for urban green and blue infrastructure, for pocket parks, for community gardens, for municipal parks. That agenda is right there on the table. And we're seeing investment around the world now in this, upscaling a lot of this infrastructure, thinking how we can reshape our cities to be more inclusive on a larger scale. And longer term, post-COVID, away from the pandemic, things like aging populations, climate change, again, will put this concept right there on the table, first and foremost, and something that we need to consider seriously as we move forward and tackle these huge global items. Without further ado now, instead of me going on and discussing this interesting topic from my perspective, as you can see, I'm very passionate about it, and I think there's a lot of important work that we need to do around this, and our speakers will be reflecting on that today. I'd like just to invite Professor Chipungu to come in, who will give a quick reflection on yesterday. Professor Chipungu is the head of the Department of Town Regional Planning in the School of Built Environment at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, has an international record on publishing around spatial planning, has published with myself before, even in a few journals as well. And so I'd like to hand over to Professor Chipungu to give her reflections on yesterday's events.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardman. And thank you very much to all our attendees and of course our panelists. Yesterday we had a very exciting day with exciting topics, and we're really grateful that colleagues still make time today to be with us. So I've got just a short presentation which I will just share with you colleagues, just to give some reflection of what exactly happened yesterday. I won't go in greater details because we're going to have rapporteurs taking the lead on this, on the reporting on the final day. But just to say, yesterday we had about 17 presenters, including the plenaries. And our plenary participants were about 200, just below 200. And of course, we had an average of 115 in all the rooms, in all our 3 rooms. Also important to notice that we had 3 rooms with 3 themes. And as we're looking through the themes, just to note that the themes are very interlinked. In fact, with the book that myself and Professor Chipungu, we have edited, which is coming up, which I'll talk to you about it in a moment. The book got three main sections. One is the laying down foundation for inclusive cities. On this section, we are basically conceptualizing what is inclusive cities, what goes into inclusivity, and what are the frameworks around inclusive cities, what makes cities inclusive, and what does it mean to be inclusive cities. So that is the first major section. And the other section in the book I'm talking about looks at the interrogating inclusivities of cities in selected countries. And here we are picking up some lessons from different countries to say what's really going on and how do other countries view and understand inclusive cities, and what are the measures in place, what are the working factors, what is not working, what needs to be done differently in the book. And then the other one, we look at the recounting the challenges for inclusive cities in South Africa. And here we are saying what's happening post-apartheid South Africa, why cities remains unequal, and the high spatial inequalities we talk about. When we have policy framework in place, we've got a lot of policy framework trying and attempting to address the issue of spatial inequalities. And those are the questions we are asking. And all these questions are grounded in actually one, number of focal points, which is the SARChI focusing on, which is women and children, migration, race and class, and people living with disabilities. So we're saying then, in South African context, how do we then design cities which responds to all these issues, to migrants, which responds to women and children and people living with disabilities. This is some of the issues that you will find in our book, which is coming. The book is going to be published by Springer. It's already almost on its way for production, and it's called Urban Inclusivity in Southern Africa. Book edited by myself and Professor Chipungu. And of course, it's about 180 pages. And we are very grateful that most of the participants here, they also contributed in this book. And trust me, get yourself a copy, Dr. Hardman, you won't regret it. Add this in your library. I just thought I need to talk about this, and I'll hand over to you because I know that we're still going to have repertoires to give more information about what happened on the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chipungu. Very interesting reflection there, and also linked to a really key text there as well, which is fantastic. Without further ado, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, where I have the absolute delight of introducing Professor Peter Bickham, who is representing the acting dean of the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of Venda in South Africa. Professor Peter Bickham is a professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning in the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Agriculture at the University of Venda in South Africa. His research interests include infrastructure planning, spatial planning, housing and urban design, and improving service delivery to communities. So without further ado, if I can bring in Professor Bickham, who is going to give a reaction on inclusive cities in relation to the rural-urban divide. Professor Bickham.
I don't seem to see Professor Bickham. I know he was having problem earlier on with login. Maybe let me try to get hold of him when you are sorting other things out. Maybe you can get another speaker. Let me just try to get hold of him.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Professor Chipungu. What we will do then is move on to our next fantastic speaker. The wonders of technology will come back if needs be. But we also have another distinguished guest with us today who's going to give a reflection on a reaction to inclusive cities. We've got Professor Michau, Daniel Michau. Professor Daniel Michau is the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He is currently Executive Dean there and is a Fellow of the South African Academy of Engineering, has published widely on topics ranging from renewable energy to blue-green infrastructure and beyond. So Professor Michał, if I may hand over to yourself to give your reaction on the topic that we're exploring today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardman. I trust that you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up my picture as well. Let me see what I need to do that. Yeah, thank you very much. It's really an honor for me to join you colleagues in this international symposium. I have been very encouraged from what I've heard and very excited about the research that is taking place. I'll be sharing a few thoughts on the topic. It has been introduced that I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at University of Johannesburg. And some of members of the departments in this faculty are participating fully in this program. I just wanted to share a little bit on this topic. And I've just prepared a presentation. The theme I would like to follow is around the issue of the number of revolutions we've had. And I'm talking about not political revolutions, but many revolutions that we've had. Right now, we are undergoing the fourth industrial revolution. And I've just taken a page on Wikipedia, so people can go back and look at it. It's discussing some of these revolutions and when they happened and what do they mean. I find this very interesting because one of the areas that we are focusing on is looking at the fourth industrial revolution and how it's impacting us, and to realize that this has been ongoing for human beings for many years. It's I find that very, very, very interesting. So one can go to Wikipedia and look at that. I wanted to maybe have a simplified version which looks at some of the things that I find interesting, such as bipedalism. You know, when human beings started walking on two legs, freeing the hands to do other things, and losing hair, and fire being one of the great revolutions that we've had, the agricultural revolution and the urban revolution, which I think is where the issues of cities comes in. And as I was reading a little bit on that area, it was interesting to see how, you know, the laws and the bylaws and ethical studies arose out of people being in a city, in a place where they are sharing space, and they had to have laws. When you are hunter-gatherer living around and you know, you don't have an opportunity to do so, but to look at the urban revolution and how it has affected us, and the famous the fourth industrial revolution that we are now undergoing. If I were to ask a lot of people which of these revolutions that we've had, you know, is the greatest one, I'm sure we would have different opinions as to which one is really the biggest one of them. But in my view, the biggest one really that we've had is water, sewer, and road system. I mean, I think that is the biggest revolution. It allowed us as a human population to move from 1 billion to about 8 billion we are right now. And it was able to do so because we were no longer tied to, you know, before you have to have a house next to a river, you have to live next to a human settlement. But right now we can live anywhere, and we can design these places anyhow we like. And we can even improve our health and this infrastructure. So I think cities are really, really critical and in enabling us as a human species to further develop and further move away from things that used to affect us and limit us. And limit us. So I look at this conference. I don't want to say too much, but I look at this conference as something very important, as this symposium as something very important as we discuss ideas. I know that right now we have many challenges. We have, all the challenges, and sometimes it's very easy to see the challenges, to see the problems that we are having, and not actually see that we are having these problems due to the progress we are making. If you don't have a car, you don't worry about tires. When you worry about tires, is because you have something else. So we are now as a human population coming to where we have new challenges, but it's because we are making progress. And I think we need to be very grateful as we face these new problems that we need to solve, because these new problems indicate that as a human species, we are making a big difference. I have an example there that people used to live to 30 years. Now, if you look at the rates as to how long we live, there are those rates there shown there, where we are now beginning to get to 80s, 70s, and 80s. And I think when we have illnesses such as Alzheimer, we should really look at it and say, wow, this represents actually progress that we have made, because had we continued as before, where we lived up to 30, we probably would never have those challenges, but we have those challenges now because we have made progress. So as we continue to do more research, and I was looking for a nice picture of saying that they used to say that we spend almost 90% of our time with our co-workers, not in our family. But I guess it's a little bit different during the COVID era, that we might be spending a lot of time at home. But we, nevertheless, we spend 99% of our time in cities. Every time I just go outside a city, it's when I'm going on vacation. So we spend a lot of our time in cities. We better make them inclusive. We better make them accommodating. We better make them subject to, to our comforts and making us do well. So in conclusion, we need to keep solving problems, new problems, so that we're making progress. And the fourth industrial revolution is indeed one of the newest tools around to solve problems. And for example, in about 2 months' time, we'll be launching 3D printing of RDP houses at UJ, and I'm looking at that. I'm looking at new technologies on how to do things and how to do them better. So for the conference organizers that have organized this real professional conference, that trust that we'll all be here, we'll all learn more and really share ideas to make our world a better place. And thank you very much for inviting me here. And thank you, Dr. Hardman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Michel. That's a really interesting presentation. That's something we'll reflect on as part of the discussion there as well. Some really powerful points there, particularly that last one there about, we spend so much time in our cities. We need to make them inclusive. Really a call for this symposium, and a call for making sure that, we're conscious of that moving forwards. And I completely agree. I think COVID has really shown how, it's really changed our work patterns, and it really changed that dynamic, but it's still important to make our cities livable and inclusive places as well. I'm just double checking with Professor Chipungu. I don't think we've got Professor Bickham still. I believe that unfortunately, because of technical issues, he's not able to join us, I believe, which, if that's the case, I will move forward. Professor Chipungu, sorry, has he not been able to join us?
No, I think we can proceed.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much. So, as a chair, I'm always eager to be ahead of time. So we're on time, we're ahead of time. We've got plenty of time for discussion, which is fantastic. If Professor Bickham comes in later, we can always have a quick reflection from him if needs be. But now I have the absolute delight of being able to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. who is Frank de Hont, who is going to be speaking shortly about urban mega projects and can they be participatory and inclusive. Frank is the director of the Territorial Capital Institute, based at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and has a very impressive profile, to say the least. I can't do it. I'll try to do my best, but I think he's done so many wonderful things, both in practice and academia. It's very impressive when I was reading through the sheer volume of work that Mr. de Hont has done over the years. But Frank is a founding member and the director of the Territorial Capital Institute, a knowledge-based platform to exchange theory and practice of integrated territorial development and placemaking. Drawing upon his experiences on localizing the urban agenda and the international guidelines on the urban and territorial planning, he's got a lot of experience in this particular sector. Frank is an independent freelance territorial planning consultant. He's currently working with a wide range of United Nations agencies in different places around the world. He's also a long-standing member and ambassador of the board of the Journal of SARChI as well, which I would definitely urge you to have a look at if you have a chance. Mr. de Hont has a master's degree in urban geography and spatial planning, both obtained from Ghent University in Belgium, where he started as a researcher at the Brussels Free University, working there for 13 years on cross-border and transnational planning in the European Union before founding and managing a planning consultancy which dealt with a large variety of spatial planning processes and projects. Since 2015, Frank has been working with mainly on an international basis with a range of UN agencies in the likes of Belarus, Kosovo, Palestine, Nepal, Afghanistan, China, Kenya, and the Caribbean as well. With UN Habitat, for example, he published a first handbook on participatory visioning and another handbook as well on urban and territorial planning, which has been recognized in the New Urban Agenda and has had a huge impact across the world. He's a founding member of the Belgium Association for Territories and Planning, was the vice president of the European Council of Spatial Planners, and currently, as I mentioned before, the ambassador and a member of the editorial board on the Journal of the International Society of City and Regional Planners. He's contributed to a wide variety of SARChI World Congresses. He's co-organized events around the world, and as you can tell, has got a very impressive record. I'm very delighted to welcome Mr. de Hont here today, very eager to hear his reflections on inclusive cities. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to our keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Frank de Hont. Over to you, sir.
Okay, I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Absolutely fine, Mr. de Hont. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much. Hello, Hope. Hello, South Africa. Hello, everyone in the room.
Sorry.
Yes?
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was finding difficulty in joining you, but I am in now. I don't know whether I can just give just 2 seconds, 1 minute, input on the rural areas. Or else, or it's sparse, but if it is sparse, it's fine.
Professor Bickham, apologies.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful time. If we hang fire for 2 seconds with the keynote, because then we can go straight into the discussion.
I won't take time. In fact, I will just summarize it as quickly as possible. What I just wanted, I'm really sorry for the speaker, the keynote speaker. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to make this.
So I stop my presentation now?
It's okay just to pause it for a minute, Mr. de Hont, and then we'll go to Professor Bickham just to give a quick reflection, saving any more IT issues just in case they arise again. We may as well strike while the iron's hot, so to speak. So, Professor Bickham, if you want to give a quick reflection, and then we'll go to our keynote
My
speaker.
quick reflection on the rural areas particularly is that we've talked a lot. Much of what we have said is about urban areas. That is with respect to planning and plans. But you will discover that in rural areas, the issue is about service delivery. And in Limpopo here, people go on strike simply because they don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have good sanitation. And then that makes them to go to, on strike. And one of the reasons is that there is there isn't enough budget. And when you don't have enough budget that can go around, and most of the people who live in rural areas cannot afford these services and pay for themselves, they rely on government for free basic services. And now free basic services cannot go around to everybody because somebody somehow, somewhere must pay. So budget becomes a very big issue. And that, hinges on the quality of services provided to rural dwellers. So as a result of that, because budget is scarce and plans that are made, sometimes most of them just stay in the shelf. They are not implemented. Hence, we have very good plans in South Africa, but if you go to rural areas, you find that those plans are not implemented to affect, to benefit the rural dwellers. So two things, in order not to waste much time, is access to services, the quality of services, and the budget that we need to think about. How are we going to go about it in a situation where COVID is eating into all aspects of budget and the economy? To me, that is the thing that I will leave with us, to say we need to think very seriously about budget to rural municipalities, increasing the budget, but also make sure that the implementation touches the rural areas. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Bickham. That's some interesting reflections there. And again, the realities of COVID and the impact on, as you said, budgets and that disconnect there between the urban and rural. Thank you again for being able to come in, and I understand you had some technological issues. That's why we wanted to try and fit you in very briefly there before our keynote speaker, Mr. de Hond, who I was just explaining has worked for many years in the EU and across the globe in spatial planning, both practice and academia, and has a wide array of publications out there and a wide array of expertise in the topic of inclusive cities that we're exploring today. So without further ado, and not to waste any time, I do apologize, Mr. de Hond. As you can tell with technology, sometimes these things happen with unfortunately Zoom and issues there. But I think if we hand over to yourself now, and you'll be exploring urban mega projects with us, can they be participatory and inclusive, and should link really well to what Professor Bickham and Professor Michal were just speaking about as well. Over to yourself, Mr. de Hond.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, if I may say so. Well, I mean, hearing my curriculum makes me realize that time flies. And you didn't even mention my greatest achievement, which was running the Comrades Marathon from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, uphill, 90 kilometers long. But what a great adventure that was. Yes, I will speak to you as director of the Territorial Capital Institute, also as Secretary General of ISOCAR, the International Society of City and Regional Planners. But I will speak basically in my private capacity. Only at the end, I will tell you something about ISOCAR. Urban mega projects, can they be participatory and inclusive? Well, I will show you a couple of spoiler alerts. The first one is unlikely, but it depends. So you have already some kind of pre-answer, but let's explore what I mean with this. Yes, I am not an academic, but yet my hobby is a kind of academic work with different people. This one was with Anna Peric. We produced this article. You can read it for yourself. It's a long title, has been published the end of last year. And that's the basic source of my presentation. So I'm going to take you to a travel to the Balkan Peninsula. You have it there in your left corner, where the Balkan Peninsula is in the European area. And we will zoom on a project in Belgrade, the northern most largest city of the Northern Balkans, and in Athens, the largest city of the Balkans overall, and of the Southern Balkans in particular. Well, let's go first to Belgrade Waterfront as an urban mega project. There you have it. It's 90 football fields large. It's intending to attract 20,000 new inhabitants, 6,000 flats, so mainly apartments, and an investment of 3 to 8 billion euro, actually not dollars, euro, so even a little bit more than dollars. And voila, here it is, you know, like a wizard. These renderings are always very tempting, of course. This is how it will look like. You see also here a view from the river Danube, yes, the largest river in the Balkan region. On your right side is the core area of Belgrade Waterfront, and at the backside you have the old city center, while on the left bank you have actually New Belgrade, which was a kind of Le Corbusier city that has been built under the socialist times, let's say. Yes, so it's not the first time that Belgrade will see skyscrapers, as a matter of speaking. Well, you know, these renderings, they all look a bit the same everywhere. Nice buildings, nice parks, happy people. Yes, and it's actually under construction, as you can see. I cannot help it that the real actual photos never look as shiny as the renderings, but that's how life works, I guess. I've been there a couple of times. It's coming very slowly to life. There is, of course, a lot of construction noise and buzzing. But yes, in terms of public spaces, it's quite a breath compared to other public spaces in Belgrade. But spoiler alert too, it hasn't been an easy ride at all. On the left side, you see a billboard actually complaining about police, undercover police, chasing people out of their houses. That is still part of the site that needs to be redeveloped. You see the rendering behind it, and it's quite a contrasting picture, of course. And then on the right side is more serious. This was a mass protest against the Serbian government, with a very clear focus also on the Belgrade Waterfront project as a example of what was called let's say it's a manifestation against the neoliberal approach of the government, which is exemplified by this project. I'm going to take you now to the second project. Later on, we will draw some conclusions. This is the second mega project in Athens, coming closer to home. That's where I live. You see the airport. That's how I arrived in Athens the first time in 1985. It then has been converted into an Olympic site during the Olympic Games in 2004. And here it is, the magic wizard again. It will be transformed in all green, some buildings, a new marina. The blue house there close to the mountain is actually where I live and where I am talking from. So I feel pretty connected to that one in particular. You see some figures there. It's really a huge area. 626 football fields compared to the 90 football fields in Belgrade. So that's really a huge area. I think one of the largest redevelopment areas still left in the capital city, at least in Europe. An investment of 9.5 billion euros, of which 1.5 billion public infrastructure, 75,000 jobs, 75,000 jobs should be generated, at least that's the promise, and it should attract 1 million visitors to Athens. And again, you know, these renderings, everything looks shiny and bright, with for the first time high-rise towers. Athens is not a high-rise city. You see Athens city center and at the back, it's what I call the white city. It's a rather flat city, but this project would actually open up to investors wanting to build skyscrapers. So that is quite for many Athenians, quite a culture shock, especially this flagship project, the casino, with skyscrapers that should resemble somehow to the Caryatides. You see that picture in the right, that is this iconic part of the Parthenon on the Acropolis. Well, you have to use your imagination to see the resemblance, but that is the official explanation. Make conclusions for yourself, yes. And then it is promised as the new city, the new model city, the 15-minute city. Well, I don't know, the 15-minute city, yeah, you have to find bicycles on this picture. This is still the coastal. It's not even a highway, it's an expressway, but you see how many lanes. It separates from the housing recreational area on the left and the coast and the seaside on the right. So I don't see any crossings, whatever. So the barrier that is currently in place doesn't seem to magically disappear in the new project. Yes, and all this, the whole project is all presented, developed by Lambda Development and teams. So basically, one owner and one developing country are responsible for the entire project. You can even call it an entire new city, a new Athens city. And according to their own branding, marketing, this Hellinikon Park project will position Athens as a world-class destination, as if it didn't happen already. I mean, who doesn't know Athens? Who doesn't know the Acropolis, the Parthenon? Every year there are actually more visitors than Athens can handle. But okay, this project will put Athens finally in the center of the attention, and Greece is ready to welcome investors. Well, spoiler alert number 3, the pictures on the right show that it was already a world-class destination for refugees, mainly coming from Afghanistan and Syria, that could not be absorbed anymore by on the islands. Well, they were partially transferred to Athens and to other cities, and they had no other place to go than to make makeshift camps on the old airport site. So you can see the sign of go to your gates, where people had their tents established and a place for worship, and children behind fences for many years in boiling hot conditions. So, I mean, that was the reality, but the future will be so much brighter. Where all these refugees went, nobody actually knows. Yes. Contrary to Belgrade, there wasn't a massive protest against this project or parts of the project or whatever, because let's say Greeks have been very much challenged by the austerity measures after the 2008 crisis, and also about on the left and also on the right, the so-called Macedonian issue, the dispute between Greece and what is now called North Macedonia. That could mobilize hundreds of protesters, but the Hellinikon project, there wasn't any massive outcry so far, at least. Well, so spoiler alert 4, that doesn't mean that everything is fine. If you look at inclusivity, well, the picture on the left that is taken last week, handing over the whole area to the private developers, Lambda, by the Greek state, well, judge for yourself who is clapping hands. On the right side, you have the picture of Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, proudly presenting, you know, the destruction of the airport buildings and saying, okay, let's get this done. He's clearly on his own. There is nobody around him. No, so it's very much a top-down decision and presentation, as far as you can see. And in terms of attracting new investors and creating a new city, environmental and so on, well, the first major Hellinikon deal drops, yes, came out last week, and hooray, hooray, the project will welcome a IKEA box and a Intersport box, very flat. So I don't know how you explain this as very forward innovative, but I guess any job is a good job. So comparing the two cases, what is the same is that they are both water-bound brownfields with a strategic location in the larger metro region, but without any strong metro regional institution. Yes, there were decades of lightweight plans and studies that never were implemented. The political focus really shifted with the financial crisis when the two countries actually opened up to investments from the Gulf and China. And the most important is that in the two cases, the land was privatized actually as an investment condition. Yes, we will invest if you sell us or actually give us the land. In the case of Belgrade, it was a giveaway. In the case of Athens, it was a sale, but a relatively cheap one, yes. And there were no imperatives on social inclusiveness, on mobility, environment, circular economy at all. In both cases, it's a very corporate planning approach. So these are all done by private companies. There was no involvement from state planning or city planning authorities, except for the approvals. And the approvals are not done according to the normal planning procedures, but in both cases, there was a lex specialis. Special laws have been created to cut the tape, as they call it, the red tape, to bypass the regular planning system, and to make sure that the local authorities are not the final ones to decide, but that it is being done at a top central level, even surpassing the parliament. What is different? Well, we don't have that much time. Let's look at the last one. Greece at least could have learned lessons from the white elephant's legacy of the Olympic Games 2004, but not really. So comparing the two cases in political way, this is, I think, for planners very often overlooked, but nevertheless very important, that you always have to look at the political background. In Serbia, it's really a cumbersome transition from a socialist to a neoliberal regime, yes, with a very rudimentary pluralism developing, low level of administration and financial decentralization, and a lack of political and institutional reforms. In Greece, many things have changed for the better and the worse since the financial bubble with a huge impact on Greece in 2008, with a political landslide towards the almost extreme left, yes, ending a post-war bipartisan rule, which was, however, short-lived. The final push for the project was given by the reborn ruling center-right party New Democracy, currently in power, yes? And then when we compare the two cases in terms of planning, in Serbia, you see that there is still, despite the transition to a neoliberal society, there is still a kind of old school comprehensive post-socialist planning culture in place, but nevertheless without a collaboration or a clear participation of the population beyond tokenism. Cities and residents are more considered as consumers and passive observers of urban developments, and a very limited impact by grassroots urban movements, although they are on the rise. In Greece, while Greece is not considered a very ideological country, it has inherited somehow almost like a Soviet-style bureaucratic approach, but sweetened by what we call the fakelakia, which are the envelopes with some bribing money to overcome the bureaucratic obstacles in obtaining building permits, land development rights, and so on. Yes. In general, planners, planning professionals, planning teachers are low paid, low respected, despite the fact that modern urban planning has its roots in ancient Greek planning tradition, but nevertheless not very much respected these days, on the contrary, which leads to a huge brain drain. So the best planners you will find nowadays around the world, especially in the Gulf, yes? And different from Serbia at least is that traditionally there is a stronger role played by the local governments, local planners and local civil society, but overruled lately by the national government, and even with the help of the European Commission, all for, let's say, the recapitalization of the empty coffers. Yes. So some common questions we can draw upon. Would the mega projects have been better planned and managed if the mayors of respectively Belgrade and Athens would have been in the lead? Not very likely, given the political context I described, not very likely. If there was a serious metropolitan institution, more likely. Yes, after all, Athens prospered only as Athens city-states 2,500 years ago. So yes, this could have made a change, but not with the current region of Attiki in Athens is too weak, doesn't have a face, doesn't have an elected politician. Well, it has, but completely invisible, crushed between, let's say, the prime minister and the local mayors. Yes, so I think that is something that is an important takeaway probably for many of these mega projects, that they cannot be handled by only the state or only the local level. There must be this intermediate city regional level to take care of. The European, if the European Union weighed in based on its own urban agenda, most likely, even in Belgrade, Serbia is still not a member of the EU, but it has an impact on the EU. If the EU would have said, listen, you can only get project funding if you do it in an inclusive and participatory way, it could have worked. Instead, the Europeans said, do whatever you want to do as long as it brings money back to the European coffers that have been used to, let's say, back up Greece after bankruptcy. Then, yeah, that would have made seriously a difference. But I think that Europe took a wrong decision here, or maybe didn't even take a decision. It just didn't look at the urban issues, but only at the financial issues on the short term. If the international planning community weighed in based on the SDGs and the new urban agenda, marginally, but it would have been better than not at all. You know, if you read about these mega projects and how they have been discussed internationally, almost nothing. You can Google it. You don't find any kind of international debate as if it is a minor project, right? If the respective planning educational system would have weighed in more seriously, also marginally, but it would have been better than not at all. But I already said so. The planning education in both countries is not considered very respectfully, yes. And if the respective civil societies would have weighed in more seriously, I would say yes, most likely. Probably this is really the Achilles heel of how these projects turned out, is the weakness of civil society. And if that could be turned around, probably the result would have been very different, yes? So the question then is, are all large urban projects doomed? I would say not all everywhere, not necessarily the entire project, and not necessarily forever. So even with these projects, there is always a possibility to change it for the better, although it will be very, very difficult to change the course of a tanker mid-sea, as you know. Well, some examples of how it could have been done better, or how it has been done better, and could serve as an inspiration. And we can hopefully complement that list with examples from your practice, from your countries. I just mentioned from my own city, where I originally come from, Antwerp and Brussels, and then a project in Toronto Region Park. Quickly, one image per project. This is similar to Belgrade. Was it an old industrial backyard, a railway yard? So here you have to imagine all these trains lining up to be regrouped, connected, and so on. And it turned into a park with many new housing opportunities around the park. And done in a very, very participatory way. 20% of the total investment budget went into raising awareness, public participation, stakeholders consultation, and so 20%. So that's one of the highest percentages I came across around the globe, actually. So in that sense, you can't be more participatory, and it's also very inclusive, because most of the apartments have been developed with and for the lower income groups, including migrant groups. So all in all, a very positive project. And imagine if these recipes and tools would have been applied to Belgrade and Athens, it would have been looked different. Another project of a massive scale is the Brussels Canal area. On the left side, you see the whole built-up area of the Brussels metropolitan area, and the red perimeter shows you the whole canal area that really transects the whole city. So it's not a minor project, it's very complex, with many backwards industries that do not function anymore under the fourth industrial revolution, and so on. But it's a more incremental approach, step by step, not a big plan, not one investor. It's a very piecemeal approach, but within a coherent vision and with a lot of public participation. That's also why SARChI in our Congress in South Africa was happy to award it for its excellence. So have a look at it. I think it's still a very interesting project, and we will visit it with our upcoming World Planning Congress in Brussels next year. And then finally, Toronto Region Park in Canada. Well, I am now also involved in establishing the World Urban Pavilion in Toronto Region Park, a collaboration of the Urban Economy Forum, SARChI, and UN Habitat. It will have a physical component within the park, but also a virtual component that will reach out to the whole world. And it is really about this brownfield redevelopment in a very inclusive and participatory way, with a lot of frictions, but if you look at the story, if you listen to the story of the communities involved, overall they say we made a big progress, we organized ourselves, we had some clashes, but the overall outcome is so much better than it was and what it would have been if it would have been developed in the way that we have seen in Belgrade and Athens through one developer and purely top down. So this is clearly a better approach of urban revitalization than we have seen in the first project. So I would say we are not necessarily doomed with big projects. So what does it take for more sustainable urban mega projects as a conclusion? Well, plan, implement, manage and monitor along the 5 qualifiers of the international guidelines on urban and territorial planning. There you have it. I will not read it out loud. You know, it has to be socially inclusive, climate resilient, walkable, keep it compact and mixed, and apply multi-level governance. If you want to read more about the international guidelines and the handbook I developed for UN Habitats together with Ulrich Grote also in the room, check for yourself. It's still a very, very useful instrument to guide us planner practitioners, but also decision makers at all levels for these kind of projects. And then finally, mobilize, empower and train local and international planning communities, for instance, through with the help of SARChI and global planning aid. And that's my last slide, actually, to say, well, if you want to be part of this global movement for gaining planning rights, helped by planners, but also the broader placemaking community, well, start or renew your membership today. There you have the website, and join our next conference, World Planning Conference, Planning Unlocked, New Times, Better Places, Stronger Communities in Doha, Qatar, 8 to 11 November. And proudly to say that we have Hope as our co-general rapporteur for the second time in a row. So that was and will be another success Congress. So be all welcome. Thank you so much for your attention, and feel free to ask any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. That was fascinating. And I think that real international flavor you gave was really interesting as well. So many questions. I've got so many questions myself, but I won't hog the limelight for too long. Just for delegates who are joining us, there's a slight change to the running order. In the running order now, it says we've got Professor Nathan Andrew, who will be coming in and giving some feedback. That will happen a bit later and not quite now. So we can move on to questions and answers, or a bit of a discussion, as I prefer to call it. And we've already got some questions, Frank, already come through. Those of you who are already in the session, you can answer or ask some questions in the box at the bottom. So it might be easiest if I go through them, Frank, and post them to yourself. I've got a few myself, and then if there's any more that come through, that might be the best way of doing this. And I think the first question is quite interesting. We've got the first one popping up here, talking about mega projects. They're inherently risky because of the long kind of planning horizons. You know, the long, we don't exactly know what's going to happen, I guess, in the future, and the complexity of everything else that's going on as well. How do we mitigate against that? So that's an interesting question there. If I click on answer live, there we go.
All right. Yes. Yes, indeed. Time horizon complexity. You could make an argument that those mega projects are designed to fail if they have this kind of blueprint approach of, hey, this is how it will look like in the next 25 years, and exactly with this kind of buildings and so on. You know, so this blueprint planning, we know already from the past, never works. And also the fact that such a mega project is developed as one project, the complexity that comes with it is also contributing to failure by design. So the only way around is what I demonstrated with the 3 more successful projects, is a more incremental process where you can start with a light overall vision, where you start with setting out the perimeters, the parameters, the guiding principles, getting all the stakeholders aligned on agreeing on the overall outline instead of the renderings, right? And then actually break it down in bits and pieces. What can we do for the greening? What can we do for the social housing? And so break it down in different components that will be managed by very different coalitions of stakeholders. And also in terms of time, yes, make it in such a way that people will not feel the burden of construction sites for 25 years ongoing. So do it in a way that you can do it area by area, and then repopulating it or populating it if it is really a greenfield development without the feeling I'm living here for 20 years in a construction site. So I think there are ways around this problem, but certainly not the way it has been dealt with in the 2 cases I showed at the beginning.
Thanks, Frank. That's a really interesting point, I think. And I don't know about yourself, but I've seen an increase in things like meanwhile planning and other tools being used as well to think a bit more creatively about how, if in those kind of phase developments, how we use space, really. So again, not a magic fix.
Sorry to not mention it, but look at the site in Athens, Hellinikon site, actually has been used since the closure of the airport in 2004. Well, 2001 it closed. So that's 20 years now. For 20 years, that space has been relatively well used for sporting events. I have done there an ultra marathon of 24 hours, but there were so many activities. The space can actually be very well used while being planned and under reconstruction. Yes. So and applying tactical urbanism, placemaking, event planning are all kind of ways to unlock a space before it really becomes a new space. So the programming of the space can actually help also finding out about the best possible use of it. Instead of having the ideal new city plan, you say, let's see how people make use of it. You remember the idea of developing a park with nicely curved pathways, and then you see that people are making their own paths through the grass. Yes. So in the design, you better wait until you see how people walk, and then you can eventually pave it if it's needed. I think that's the same approach that you need in planning.
Fascinating. Thank you for that insight. And just to move on to the next question, we've got quite a few questions coming through, which is great. Lots of discussion, and a lot of people obviously interested in your talk here. We've got Samuel here who's saying, thank you for your presentation. However, not downplaying the beauty of these projects and what they tend to kind of lead to. How do we balance this with the original inhabitants who could be displaced because of these mega projects?
Yeah, in the case of Belgrade, this was a serious issue, and you have seen the billboard that was put up to complain about people being uprooted from their neighborhoods for the new, more richer inhabitants to come. So clearly, this is the first indication that the project is not very inclusive, of course. I don't say that you know, that these projects can be developed without any kind of pain. There is always some price to pay. Some people are losing, but it's a matter of putting up the correct mitigations from the very start, and to involve those communities who will be affected, and look for acceptable mitigations from the very start, not waiting for protests and so on. So yeah, it is an issue. In the case of Athens, it wasn't a big issue because it was an airport after all. It was an abandoned Olympic site, one of these white elephants. The biggest issue is that people will lose their favorite sports center, Ios Kosmas, along the beach. I have run there thousands of kilometers to train for marathons. I see there's so many people still going, and you can see that they are really sad that they will lose this place because it will become a very commercialized sea promenade, not really fit for sweating runners going around for hours and hours. So yeah, there is something to be dealt with in terms of, hey, what are people gaining, but also what are people losing, and how can we mitigate?
Yeah, we see that happen quite a lot, don't we? And I think some important reflections there as well, some important points. A fantastic question there, Samuel, as well. Thank you for asking that. And the next one, how are megacity, or how are mega projects, inclusive? I guess it's quite a large question. You kind of went over a bit in your presentation. I don't know if you want to try and capture that again, or best practice again about inclusivity in mega projects.
Yeah, well, inclusiveness, yeah, is not something you can tick a box, right? It's not like, okay, we have included now X% social housing, and thereby we are inclusive. Inclusive is a very, very broad concept. It's inclusive within. So what kind of people will live there? What is the social mix? What kind of services will they use and share? Yes. So the big fear for Athens and also Belgrade is that you will have not just a gentrification, but almost like a gated community, right? The rich people investing there, they want, of course, the so-called security, and they will make sure that no undesired guest will stroll around, or that any musician will play its tune if it is not somebody who is contracted by the security company. You know how it goes. So inclusiveness is a very, very difficult process, but it can only achieve if you really work with a existing or a future community. The later one is of course a very difficult one. How do you plan inclusively for a new area with future residents? Well, in the case of Antwerp railway project, they have actually, the time span of the planning process was so long that they could also already say who is interested to come to live here, and involve those people in shaping their future place, right? And making sure you have that diversity, and that you have seen this beautiful pond, right? It's actually a kind of square with shallow water in the summers with fountains, is not only visited by residents within, but also from people all over the city in a very inclusive way. There's no gate. There is, and you see that people from all colors and incomes are really mixing up there. So that is of course a great achievement, not easy to achieve.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, one of my questions is going to be around, this kind of increasing privatization of public space and the extent to which these projects have led to that. But I guess you've just answered that in a way, ensuring that these are open and these assets are open for all as well, which is fantastic to see. Not always the case, as you said.
No, that is the biggest crime in the two first projects, is that in both cases, the entire land, imagine 600, more than 600 hectares have been sold off, privatized without any kind of guarantees on its development. that is of course unacceptable and a recipe for disaster, I would say, claim.
Yeah, important points there. Samuel, I'm just going to skip over your next question because I feel that Frank has alluded to that already, but your next question is quite important as well, where you talk about cultural inclusion. How was that part of the process in perhaps designing and implementing the projects that Frank's looked at? So, Frank, I don't know if you wanted to provide a reflection on that, because I think it's an important point.
With cultural inclusion, you mean cultural diversity or cultural events or cultures? What kind of culture you are referring to?
I think Samuel was probably meaning cultural diversity in terms of the array of just the array of groups and some of the cases you mentioned where you've got lots of different. I mean, Athens, for example, is very multicultural, and was there efforts there to integrate these different diverse communities?
This is actually not very multicultural compared to North European cities. The only multiculturalism is defined by your income. So if you're high income, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're low income or no income, it does really matter where you come from. Yeah, I mean, multiculturalism, there will be, of course, very different investors in the Hellinikon projects coming from all over the world, investing in real estate in a top location in Athens. So yeah, in a way, you can say, this will increase the diversity, but it is based on one single parameter, that is the ability to afford such an investment. Think about at least not half a million, a million euros or dollars for the cheapest condo, that kind of range. So yeah, it is of course a very limited cultural diversification that you will achieve on this basis.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, yeah, those barriers exist, and that does act as a deterrent really to enabling cultural diversity. I think the next question is quite interesting, links quite well to what you've just been discussing actually around gentrification really, and the outputs of some of these mega projects. Is there a way of, I guess, preventing that in a way, or the impact of this, or acting as a catalyst for wider gentrification?
That's a very, very crucial question. If you aspire inclusiveness, then you must develop a kind of complex answer to gentrification. Not in a way that you say gentrification is not welcome at all, but gentrification is welcome within certain parameters. So if you are dealing with a derelict area that has been abandoned by the middle class, high class incomes, you get a lot of problems related to almost like ghetto issues, and you want to overcome this by restoring some kind of social diversity and mix. Yes. So a guided gentrification is in those cases sometimes desirable. Yes. Of course, it is very, very difficult to really control. The only way you can control is to guarantee a number of housing that is only accessible to certain income groups, right? That prices of services are accessible or affordable, or that there are mechanisms to make sure that lower incomes will pay less for services than higher incomes. So it's not an easy answer. I wouldn't outright say gentrification is always a bad thing, but it needs a very, very social, strong governance system to mitigate, to monitor, and to adapt to make sure that the income diversity is respected.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive topic, as you say, and something that, yes, I do agree has to be monitored. But yeah, interesting question there, and thank you for asking that. The next question, Idris, I think what you're trying to get across here is, was there any kind of compulsory purchase scheme involved in any of these projects, particularly in Athens? You're talking about people being forcibly moved because of the mega projects. How did the government kind of do that? So I presume, correct me if I'm wrong, Idris, you can come in on the chat, but you're looking at compulsory purchase there. Was that part of the Athens context, and were there any kind of repercussions to what was happening with that scheme, I guess?
Yeah, that was mostly the case in the Belgrade Waterfront, where people were expropriated, but some people didn't buy, let's say, or didn't accept the expropriation fee or to be expropriated. And then you have these accusations that police intimidated people or even chased them out of their houses so that the house could be demolished. I don't know the details about this in the Belgrade case. In the Athens case, there was no single housing that need to be demolished or uprooted. So that's of a different nature. But yes, in all these, in many of these mega projects, you have this clash with we want a new project and we need a tabula rasa. That is one of the main problems. If you really say we need a complete green sheet, a fresh sheet to start from, you will cause social damage or cultural heritage damage, whatever. So again, the answer there is a more delicate approach where you do it step by step. And yeah, well, you can also integrate old vernacular architecture into a new project and say, give it its time, and maybe it's another generation, and then we reconvert. So I have seen examples of this even in China, in Wuhan, where we have seen a major shift over of a central commercial access in the city, full of post-colonial or colonial architecture. But people in the side streets, they kept their own way of living and housing. And the confrontation is now huge between the main street and the side streets. But that is part of the diversity. So yeah, I mean, that all comes with the idea, I want a blank sheet and we will develop everything from scratch.
Thanks, Frank. It's a very sensitive area again, and an important question. I'm just aware that I am grilling you at the minute with these questions, and just to give you a little bit of a break, if I bring back some of our other speakers who were speaking earlier, Professor Michal, Professor Bickham, you can use the raise hand button if you want to answer, but I don't know whether you had any thoughts on Frank's presentation and some of the themes that we're picking up on here, whether compulsory purchase is something you've come across in your own work, or any good exemplars of kind of inclusive mega projects that you've come across as well. I think that was a really important point from your presentation, Frank, where you looked at not just critically reviewing the projects that you looked at, but also looking at good practice as well. And I do wonder whether Professor Michal, Professor Bickham have got any thoughts on that. I think Professor Bickham's still with us. Professor Michal is still there as well. If you would like to come on, Professor Michal, I'll hand over to yourself.
Thank you very much. I do not have anything as such to add, but I'm interestingly listening to the discussion. I think it's very good. I thought the presentations on mega projects was great, and there were a lot of good lessons learned. Thank you.
Thanks. Professor Bickham, have you got any points to add so far?
Yeah, mine is just a clarity-seeking question to say, yes, mega projects, how inclusive are they with people who are a little bit marginalized? These mega projects are always in urban areas. What is the implication for inclusiveness particularly those who are a little bit marginalized. How do they participate? Are they part of it? Are they inclusive? Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Bickham. I think Frank went over parts of that, but I don't know if you want anything, add anything there, Frank, on what Professor Bickham was asking. Really, I think coming from that wider element there as well, and the inclusive nature of some of these projects.
No, I have no particular addition at this point. If there are any other questions, feel free.
Yeah, I'll keep inviting our speakers back. It was just to give yourself a little bit of a break. It'd be interesting again, Professor Michel, Professor Bickham. Please raise your hand if you come in a bit later. But if you can think of any good exemplars, I think that'd be interesting as well, just to hear from particularly your experience in South Africa and elsewhere, of where maybe there's some good practice around kind of mega projects and being inclusive, or indeed the other way. Which I think is quite interesting as well. Lessons that we can learn, as Frank was alluding to within his discussion.
Well, yeah, maybe the project of World Urban Pavilion that is in the making, which will be rooted in Regent Park, Toronto, will actually be a kind of knowledge centers to exchange practices on urban regeneration. Yes, the focus will be on brownfield development. So how to retrofit urban neighborhoods, how to adapt them to climate, but also to inclusiveness, to the walkable city approach, and so on. So that will be an interesting experiment where I would also, and the idea would be that the World Urban Pavilion idea that will start in Toronto can be replicated in other parts of the world. So, get your own World Urban Pavilion in Manchester, or get it in Durban, where you really say these are places where we connect the local, the community, with the global, because we must find ways to communicate between communities through those intermediates. Yes, so there is no United Nations of communities. There is only a United Nations of countries, and you can even wonder if communities really feel represented by their countries. But through these intermediate organizations, like World Urban Pavilion, we can actually try to engage in a communication from community to community.
Yeah, it's an interesting model. It'd be interesting to hear more about that. And I presume, I think these resources will be available afterwards. Again, an interesting exemplar there for replication elsewhere, which sounds really, really exciting. Professor Michel, sorry, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, actually there is a question from Gareth that I thought is very interesting. I've answered one more question, but he's asking, how do you allow both the rich and poor to benefit from a mega project when usually what happens is that the poor are pushed out of the city or into the slums? What sort of things can we do to ensure that that doesn't happen? I'd like to hear Frank's ideas on that. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, well, that is of course the big deal. The big deal is how do you include what was called marginal groups in society, or deprived communities. How do you integrate them in a new approach? But this has to do with your parameters from the very start of the planning process. So that always needs that there must be a common, there is a public engagement and overall control. By just privatizing the whole area, I think you give away those guarantees that it will be done in a participatory and inclusive way. It doesn't say that the private should be excluded. In the case of the Regent Park in Canada, there is one particular corporation that is not just a building there for profit, but they actually have established their company as a social entrepreneurial organization. So they say we make profits for the people. So I think it's I mean, one of the leverages could be that you look at private investors with a social drive or the willingness to engage the vulnerable communities in not only developing the idea, but also implementing. So instead of having your workers coming from outside, you know, the migrant workers, the season workers, very cheap, you use your own people to get the projects done. That was one of the success elements that brought over the community in Regent Park, is that they say, hey, we are not just consulted if we like it or not, we are part of the rebuilding. We have jobs now in our own neighborhood. We don't have to take the car or public transport to far away jobs. We can do our job here, yes? But that's because there was a very good interaction between the city authority, the state authority, namely the city authority of Toronto, and the private sector, saying the private sector is especially welcome here if you work with and employ the people from this particular community. Yes, and that creates a very, very different relationship and social contracts. I would say you need for this kind of projects a kind of social contract, which is almost as important as a spatial plan. Yes, a spatial plan without a social contract is a failed plan.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Dr. Hardman, if I talk too much, please do stop me. I have two interesting questions. One of them is, what is the right size? You know, has anybody done research on what is a right size for space for somebody? I'm asking this question. I've been to Brazil. I've been to other places where you know, you have looked at how the housing is being done and the congestion that is being created. So that raises a question for me about what is really the right size for human beings. You know, has anybody looked at that? Can something like that be answered? The second question that I have is that I've looked at how China does some of these mega projects, and they spoken to some of those people. They really give them lots of money, but can really money be enough when you have to be moved because of some mega project that is going to be done? Is that fair? What are the issues? You know, what is the discussion in that space? Thank you. Thanks, Frank.
Well, yeah, maybe I'm also speaking too much, but it's up to the moderator to shift the attention to other people. The first question for me goes back to Le Corbusier. Not that I am particularly fond of Le Corbusier as an urban planner. I think he caused more damage than good, but you know, I think in his original conception, he had some very, very innovative ideas like the existence minimum, the minimum existential space you need. But this was in mind that you need actually a very little space if you have a large public space around it. So the idea of his towers on pillars, where you have you know, parks around the building, but also under the building, was actually, you know, you don't need a large balcony, you don't need a garden. Your garden is the area around the building. So then you can actually shrink the housing unit to a minimum, but that's a very different case in many Chinese projects where you have tiny apartments looking into the interior of the surrounding small apartments, because they have built up a high density of high density towers. So that is certainly not the way forward. But again, there are some very, very good examples of nicely spread out towers, apartments with common spaces in between, not occupied by cars or by streets, And that actually reduces the need for large housing units. So I think that is our duty as urban planners, is not just to look at the housing unit as itself, but within the larger context of the community around it. And also a new trend in housing is, of course, the cohabitation, where you have a housing unit with shared services. Yes, so a shared could be even shared bathroom, shared gym space. Okay, gym. Shared. You can have a football pitch on the top of the building if there is no space down. You can have a shared workshop where you can fix small things, where things are available that you don't have to purchase yourself, screwdrivers or a drill or whatever. So this is also the way forward, that you say there is so much space in your house that doesn't really need to be there if you make it communal space. Everybody needs his or her own toilet. Yes, we understand. But like a large bathing facility could be shared, and it also increases social contact. And it saves maybe water if you manage it well, or you can recycle the water. So this kind of new way of cohabitation is, I think, a very interesting way forward.
Interesting point, Frank. We're seeing a lot more of those models in the UK as well. At the moment, they're very much dominated by kind of more the affluent class, those high-income earners who want to live in them. But maybe in the future, that's something that could be a bit more open to more people, really, where they've got those shared facilities. They have shared vehicles as well. And there's been I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a statistic where there's been a huge rise of those types of communities at the moment. So interesting to hear some reflections there as well. I don't know if Professor Bickham or Professor Mashal, Professor Bickham, are there any examples of such communities or in your work? Do you want to come in there as well?
Yes, there are, but I think let me just start by saying Frank really touched on the key things with respect to different social housing, approaches. In Paris, for example, where I lived for a very long time, they tried this model by this approach where areas that used to be no-go areas, the French government, particularly in Paris, decided that they are going to have an inclusive housing approach, where those big ensemble, those big gigantic buildings were brought down with the approval of the community. They build different housing units with different types of apartments, apartment where they call F1, F2, F3, that is a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 1-bedroom. And they have areas, playground, outside where children can play. So there was a mixture of people who are in this upper social class, as well as people who are in the lower social class who interacted. And then there is transportation from the city center to those areas. And it made life very, very easy for them. One example was in Bansen. In South Africa, I have not seen that much, because even the transport system, we are just starting with some of the mass transit, introducing them now. So to get there, it will take some time. We are not yet, we are still a developing country. We are still learning from what happened in Toronto, in France, in Athens. But I think the approach that Frank did give is very, very important. That the best way to go is to have a different approach to inclusive housing. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any other further reflections there from our colleagues, Professor Chipungu, Professor Mashal. I'm just aware, Frank is obviously our keynote, but I don't want to burn him out with all the questions that we're asking today. So I think really important to reflect on what's happening elsewhere as well. I don't know, Professor Michel, Professor Chipungu, if you've got any reflections on that particular point.
Yeah, no, let me just add on this one, because thank you very much, Frank, for your discussions. I think they really do make us think. I'm at the University of Johannesburg, as you know, and we are now working on a human health surveillance project that we expected to last next 20, 30 years. And one of the areas we have chosen to work on this project is in Hillbrow in Johannesburg. Now, Hillbrow in Johannesburg is interesting because it's mostly migrants to South Africa, but it's also interesting that it's also a high-rise area. So it's people are living in flats, and one of the things trying to understand what is the impact on their health in general. And but I liked some of the ideas that Frank was saying about sharing, and I think right now the idea is that one might now start to looking at that, because my general view will be that it's really unhealthy. But people do live there, and they have to live there, for other reasons. So as we look into this issue of inclusive cities, and I think it's raising some interesting questions, and thank you very much for that. Let me leave it to Professor Hangwelani. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, colleagues. I just want to make some quick reflections around, I think this one question comes from Dr. Nzimande, where he's saying in South Africa, in terms of mega projects and the political landscape. And I'm thinking, you see, the issue around political landscape and corruptions are very difficult to deal with, because you're dealing with the attitudes, you're dealing with people's perceptions and how they see things. So it's more like morals, we are dealing with that. Ethics, which is something that people need to have. You just have to have ethics if you're working. So it's very difficult to come up with a way how you should deal with perceptions and how and the ethics. But what we can say is that if we can all do what we're supposed to do when we plan things, this world will be a better place. If a cleaner has to clean, and because they're supposed to clean, it's their job, and the typists type, and anyone do their job, this world should be a better place. But as it is now, it's very difficult once you start talking about who benefits more. The systems, we do have tools and the system, the check and balances in place, which is supposed to actually prevent that from happening, but it's still happening. So you must also remember that we are talking about human beings here, so who got perceptions and the way of doing things. So even if you put policies in place and people still don't have morals and ethics, you're still going to have the poor being the victim in the whole equation, and the political parties, or those who are affiliated to certain political parties, be the one who are winning. So what am I advocating for? Basically, I'm saying we all have to do our work and do it diligently so, and we have to observe standards and what we have in place, policies that we have in place. And it's up to individuals, it's up to us as individuals to say this to what we need to do. Right now, South Africa is spending a lot of money on what they call state capture, which is to do with corruption. It's a lot of billions are going there. That money could be used for something else. That shows you how deep-rooted this issue of corruption, this issue of perception, it is an issue. I think if we are to address that, we need to deal with the perceptions, we need to deal with how people see things. If our intention is to get our city to be inclusive, as we are saying, to make sure that our cities are inclusive, I think that's where we need to start. To say we all have to be saying the same thing, and I'm hoping through this discussion, we're starting to see how other people are affected. So I always say that as an individual, wherever you are, every single day, you should understand that your impact or your actions, you not signing that particular form in your office because we need to execute a certain project, you are actually failing all of us. No matter how small your office is in your view, you must understand that we are part of a broader picture. We are all together. So if in the process and the chain, one person cut and not do their job, we are not going to make it. So that would be my reaction on that question.
Thank you, Professor Chipungu. That's interesting. And I was gonna, you actually did my job, which is fantastic. You got in there and answered it, because it's an important question, and something that you know, it'd be good to reflect. I don't know if Professor Michal, Professor Bicken, before we draw things to a conclusion, have a quick reflection on that interesting question about mega projects in South Africa. Don't worry if you haven't. Just giving you an opportunity there to add to the discussion there. Whether there's any reflections on what Professor Chipungu was just mentioning there as well.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is how development is taking place. I'll give you one example. We are working with the city of Tshwane, and one of their biggest problems is it's how the city is developing in terms of people just building informal infrastructures near the place. Obviously, they don't build them very far from the towns. They build them very close because you know, it cuts on their transport and so on. But then the way they build them in such a way that even when the government wants to remove and build another project on it, it cannot. Because as soon as they move out the people, new people move in. You know, as soon as they do that, because of I think it's because of the pressure for housing and development. So it somehow, I think it was in Malaysia, no, maybe one of these countries that I went to, where they decided to build a new capital city somewhere else, you know, and then try to lead from the front. And what we are doing right now with us, we tend to be waiting for individual, you know, poor communities maybe building places, and then a government realizing, oh, this is a place that we can build on, and that causes different kind of problems. So if we were able to plan ahead of time and say, well, you know, this place looks like a desert, but hey, this is where we are going to do something, you know, and the president is looking at a smart city near Lanzeria. Now, there isn't anything there, but those kind of approaches where we lead and determine upfront what should be happening. I think those ideas will really help us if we're doing that way. But right now, a lot of it is, you know, where the cities get surprised with the growth, get surprised with the demand, and then they start trying to do something with it, which then unfortunately gets to those problems where the poor get pushed out and only those who are able to do it. But yeah, these are great ideas, and we really need to investigate and see how to improve on our future mega projects. I'll take that idea as well with me, because I think it's a great idea to think of. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Michal. Some interesting reflections there. If I may add, just from my perspective, before drawing things to a close, I mean, I'm aware of some mega projects here that have had some innovative schemes, very similar to what you mentioned, Frank, actually, where they've only provided jobs to people living in certain postcodes, for example. So the most deprived postcodes in certain areas were able to apply for jobs. Those types of schemes, quite interesting. But on the flip side, we have seen this huge rise in a lot of our mega projects privatizing public space and having these negative impacts as well, which is you know, clearly not good. I think there's a lot of reflections there in this session. There's been a lot that we've kind of reflected on, a lot of questions, which is fantastic. So we've kind of gone from one end to the other, looking at good practice, looking at ways that we can involve communities, diverse communities, actively in planning and designing these mega projects, but also as part of their implementation as well. So there's been a lot of interesting topics that we've tried to cover as part of this. I have just tried to multitask, by the way, and answer some of the questions in the chat box. Gareth, I will get to your question, by the way. I will send a reply briefly. I did start typing something, but I'm not very good at multitasking, so I'm not going to try and do that. But I am just aware of time. And I am aware that we have been grilling the presenters quite a lot. Given the fact that the program's changed slightly, we've had a bit more of a discussion, and I think that's fantastic, because this is such a powerful topic, that people are so passionate about this, that clearly we want to hear the expert views from Frank, Professor Michal, Professor Bickham, Professor Chipungu as well. So really interesting reflections there. I think going back to what I said right at the beginning though as well, inclusive cities, it's the future. It's something that is going to get a lot more interest on top of the interest that's already out there already, particularly post-COVID. We're going to see a lot more focus on this, particularly with things like mega projects going forward. There's going to be a need for developers, a need for other key actors to really consider this in the planning stages all the way through, as Frank was saying, to the implementation stages as well. So a hot topic, some really interesting reflections. All of this has been recorded. It's all on YouTube as well. So if you feel we went too quick at one point, you can listen back. There's plenty of material on there as well as all the answers to the questions. But unless any of our panelists have got anything to add, I am just aware of time and making sure we've got the time to transition to our rooms and to the wonderful sessions that are on this afternoon. Professor Chipungu, is there anything you would like to add before we kind of close this panel session?
Yeah, I just wanted to just give my reaction. I think there's a question I'm just seeing on the chart there about the homelessness. I'll be very brief. How do we deal with that? I think and this is one of my area of interest with research, to say what do we have to do. I think the focus has been on how do we house them, how do we accommodate them. But I think we also need to start asking our questions. Why do we have the problem? Why are they on the street? Because unless we can answer that part, we are not going to be able to do anything, including housing them, including giving them space to live in. Because if we then focus on just giving the space, we don't know what is the cause of that. For all we know that we could be creating accommodation for even more larger people who are coming. So maybe what we need to start focusing on is to also say, why are they on the street? I know there are a lot of studies which has been done and trying to attempt to answer that question, but we also need to quantify them. Do we know with accuracy how many people in the city of Durban now who are homelessness and why they're homelessness? And what needs to be done to actually prevent that? Because I'm of the view that if we focus on actually trying to give them accommodation only without dealing with the source of the problem, I don't think we'll be solving the problem. If anything, the problem will be getting worse than it should. So sorry, my son just walks in. So I'm saying, I think we need to focus on that. That is very important, to make sure that we actually understand the sources of the problem before we can even whatever the other things. So you will understand, I'm also a mother.
Thank you, Professor Chipungu. I think there's some very powerful points as well, and some wonderful initiatives around the world, trying to address the root cause, as you say, as opposed to just some quick fixes there as well. Again, just being aware of time, I just would like to hand a huge thank you again to our speakers today, Professor Bickham, Professor Michal, Professor Chipungu, and obviously our keynote, Frank Nahon, who fantastic discussions, some wonderful projects there as part of that presentation, a lot that we can take home and a lot of lessons to be learned as well. Just a big thank you again to the University of KwaZulu-Natal and who made this possible, and again the organisers of this event. There's some wonderful breakout rooms after this. Professor Chipungu might have more information on that, but I'm aware that there's about 3 breakout rooms, if I'm not mistaken. So we're finishing bang on time, which is great. Even though we managed to start a bit early, have a bit more of a discussion, but gives you enough time to move to those rooms. So unless Professor Chipungu's got anything to add, without further ado, I'll close this plenary. Thank you again, everybody. Wonderful seeing you all. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of the International Symposium. Goodbye, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. That's really great. Thank you.
Really great indeed.
KwaZulu-Natal is the subtropical pearl of South Africa, with boundless landscapes stretching from Southern Africa's highest peaks to the golden sands of the Indian Ocean. Lying within this beautiful scenery is a university that strives to inspire greatness. The University of KwaZulu-Natal is a multi-campus residential, teaching and research-led university with a proud and rich heritage of academic excellence. Its 5 centers of learning are situated in the cities of Durban and Pietermaritzburg, in the heart of this beautiful province. UKZN is the largest contact university in sub-Saharan Africa, with over 4,200 employees and 49,000 students across all disciplines, including some 3,000 international students from 82 countries. Our staff are drawn from all over the world and reflect different demographics and cultures. Of our academics, more than 50% hold a PhD as a minimum qualification. UKZN is ranked as one of the top 3 research-led universities in South Africa and amongst the top 3% of universities worldwide. As a university, we have streamlined our academic sector to be more effective and responsive to the needs of our students by adopting the college model and have 4 colleges spread over our 5 campuses. These include the College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science, the College of Health Sciences, the College of Humanities, and the College of Law and Management Studies. Each college is led by a Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Head of College. UKZN's Transformation Charter is key in steering our identity and culture, providing a set of transformation goals vital for achieving our vision as the premier university of African scholarship. At UKZN, transformation and excellence are closely paired, with both goals being integral to the other. Our mission is to take the lead in cutting-edge African-focused research and community outreach and to provide quality tertiary education that is available to all. In striving to offer a learning environment that is accessible to all South Africans, at UKZN, we facilitate several avenues of financial support for our student population, totaling some 1 billion rand. Generous scholarships are available for top academic and sports achievers, whilst the university works closely with the National NSFAS Bursary and Loan Scheme, as well as private and corporate donors to assist our students in need. All these factors make UKZN a uniquely South African university that is academically excellent, innovative in research, critically engaged with society, and demographically representative. As a proudly research-led university, UKZN provides a dynamic environment for all facets of research and innovation and consistently punches above its weight in the production of weighted research outputs. The College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science is at the forefront of such innovation, with its work in developing drought and disease-resistant staple crops that enable food security in Africa. From the College of Health Sciences, a gel that reduces the incidence of HIV and a skin patch that administers insulin without needles are both world firsts. The College of Law and Management Studies produces specialized and accredited professionals in the field of law, accounting, marketing, financial management, human resources, public administration, and IT. And the College of Humanities actively contributes to the intellectual development of the region through thought-provoking annual festivals such as Time of the Writer, the Durban International Film Festival, Jomba Contemporary Dance Experience, and Poetry Africa. Moving forward, UKZN has identified 4 strategically oriented cross-discipline research flagship focus areas, namely African health that aims to save lives, big data and informatics that offers relevant computer solutions for Africa, social cohesion that addresses inequality and promotes nation building, and African cities of the future, which moves towards creating livable cities. These flagship research areas are intimately aligned with UKZN's new 5-year strategic plan. Launched in 2017, the plan outlines the institutional culture, goals, and enablers that will help UKZN realize its full potential as South Africa's university of choice for the country's most talented students and scholars. By focusing on excellence in teaching and learning, high-impact societal and stakeholder community engagement, targeted internationalization, and excellent and high-impact research, innovation, and entrepreneurship, UKZN aims to contribute meaningfully to the future of South Africa and add real value to all its stakeholders.